everyone, welcome to Recitation 4. So today we'll be going over Module 4, which is input and output. So to give an overview of what this recitation will cover, Module 4, like I said, covers input and output, but what that really means is the use of standard draw, which is a library that allows us to draw shapes and pictures and do some kind of basic animations too. And Module 4 also covers the use of generative AI and like how best to prompt AI tools to get helpful code, best practices for working with that, etc. So just as some background, we're kind of really introducing the concept of APIs in this unit. And so what an API is it's an application programming interface, and that allows you to communicate between two different pieces of software. And it gives you like a good, um, neatly packaged way to do that, which can help you do more complex things that maybe would take you a long time to kind of completely build yourself, in a more easy and um, more intuitive way, I guess. So, um, kind of examples of some of these tasks that will be easier to do with an API. What we'll be using it for is like drawing and reading from a file, but it can also be used for getting data from a server and increasing efficiency in your code. Um, for our purposes and kind of in general, you don't need to understand how the API does what it does. You just need to know how to use the API. So that's kind of what I was saying about it being like neatly packaged and easy to understand, is that's kind of the benefit of an API is you don't need to know all the kind of nitty-gritty details of what's going on behind the scenes. You can just get um, kind of the information on how to use it. So here's some APIs that we've used before or will be using in this module. So scanner is one that we should be pretty familiar with by this point. Um, that is actually an example of an API, and that allows you to receive input from the keyboard. So we've been using this, and maybe we didn't know it was an API, but that's an example of what an API can help you do. File is a new one that we're introducing, and that's an API that we use to read information from files. So this will be used in Studio 4 and will also be used in assignments 5 and 8. So again, you don't need to understand how um, the API itself works, and you don't even really need to understand how to use the API to open a file for this. We will provide you with most of the code that you need. Um, but you should understand that file and scanner can kind of work together, so that you can scan in or read in information from a file using a combination of these two APIs. So, um, just kind of a scanner guide. So this is something that we've seen before. The first line is initializing our scanner object. So scanner in equals new scanner and then system.in. Then these are things we've seen before again, but we use in.next, in.nextLine, in.nextInt, in.nextDouble, and in.next Boolean to get the next whatever from the user input. So here's an example of code, um, and I'll give you guys a second to pause this video and just kind of predict the output, understand what each line is doing, and just make sure we're familiar with these concepts. Okay, now I'm going to move on. So here's the answer, and you can kind of see that scanner will take in what the input is and then print it out. So it's like taking in exactly the user input and printing it back out. So now to introduce a new one for this unit, Standard Draw is the API that we use to show drawings and animations to the user. This also allows us to detect when a user clicks down or presses a key. And these are both things that are really helpful in creating kind of um, like graphic user interfaces or user experiences, so you can kind of get the basics of like games going now that we have the standard draw library. Um, so kind of what I was saying about not needing to know every single detail of what's going on with like an API. You shouldn't need to memorize how to use any of these standard draw methods as long as you learn to read the documentation and follow along with the documentation. Documentation is what tells you what methods within the API do and how to call them. So the documentation will give you like um, what's the name of the method that you want to call? What are the parameters? What is the type of the parameter? So it'll give you all that necessary information that you need to properly call the methods and use the API. So kind of as an aside for exams, if there's any standard draw stuff that will appear on the exam, we will provide you with the relevant standard draw documentation. And of course, for assignments and for studios, you're not only allowed but encouraged to use the documentation as you work. And here's a link to that standard draw documentation, but you'll also have this in other places, so don't worry about saving this link.
All right, so to show you a bit more about how the standard draw actually works, here's a simple drawing example. We'll get more into detail about how this all works in a bit. But let's say I want to draw a filled in rectangle in the very middle of my screen with a width of zero point 0.2 and a height of zero point 0.3. Well, I look in the standard draw documentation and I see just filled rectangle and then parentheses double x comma double y comma double half width comma double half height. So what does this actually mean? Well, when I'm trying to call this method, there's a few things you have to like change, but you'll be generally following the format that is in documentation. So, probably most important, you have to put standard draw in front of like the name of the method. So in this case, stand like filled rectangle, you have to put a period between standard draw and filled rectangle. So I usually just say like standard draw dot filled rectangle. Then in these parentheses, you see like double x, double y, etc. So in the documentation, the double tells you what data type it expects for that parameter. And then the x shows you like kind of like what the parameter should represent. And of course we call just to like step back a bit, we call each of like the things separated by commas and parentheses parameters. That's just information that the method needs in order to be able to complete its task. So for this example, standard draw dot filled rectangle. So point 0.5, if we look back at the first spot in the documentation, we see that it should be a double and it should represent the x position of our rectangle. Very similar with the second parameter, it should be a double, represents the y position. Then for the third parameter, it should also be a double, and it should represent half of the width. So I said my width should be zero point 0.2. Well, half of that is 0.1. So that's why that's there. And then final parameter, lastly, of course, a double, and then it's half the height. So 0.15 is half of zero point 0.3. And then whenever I run it, I get this cute little output window. And that's just a plain black square in the middle of the window. And so for a little bit more of an explanation for this rectangle line, so this overall standard draw screen's coordinates go from like at the bottom left, x being 0 and y being 0, to at the top right, x being 1 and y being 1. So that's why 0.5 was in the center of the screen, and why like zero point 0.1 and 0.15 had that scale on the screen. I mean, you can technically change that if you read the documentation, but like you don't need to for this course definitely. Um, and then some common things you might want to know: how can we change the color? Well, in documentation, you would see set pen color and then int red, int green, and int blue. So when we actually want to call that, we could do std draw dot set pen color, because again, you always need to put the std draw in front since that's the name of the API. And then in those parentheses, you put in parameters that match what is specified in the documentation. So documentation says it should be an int, and it should represent like the red value. If you know anything about like RGB color, like that's what it represents, like the red value in RGB color. And then next, so that's 200. Then second, int that represents the green RGB value. And then third, int that represents the blue RGB value. So that's what this line does, sets the pen to the color I specified in RGB. If you aren't super familiar with RGB, I'm sure you can like look up um like a color picker or something and it should tell you the RGB value. Uh, but yeah, and like higher numbers means brighter colors, lower numbers means darker colors, but we usually give you the RGB values that you need in this course. And then any shapes that you draw after calling the set pen color line will be given that RGB color until you call set pen color again, of course. So let's say I want to draw a purple outline of an ellipse. Well, there's another method, set pen radius. You can see its documentation on the website, but basically, you just put in a double that represents like the width of the pen that's drawing each stroke. So just 0.02 is like good for visibility. And then you can also look in the documentation for ellipse, basically like oval slash circle shape. Um, and so you the parameters will represent the center of the ellipse and the radius. So first one is x, second one is y, and third one is the radius of the ellipse. So yeah, that's just how that line works. But of course, look more at documentation, see if you can compare what the documentation says with how I'm using it. And like see if you can figure out, oh yeah, that drawing over to the bottom right makes sense. Cool. But yeah, and then you'll see a lot of examples of standard draw in like Studio, um, and of course the assignments. But yeah, if you ever need more, like go ahead and just take a look at the documentation. You can also ask your like TA for an example, all that good stuff. And then for drawing text, it's a little complicated, but here's what the documentation says. So text, double X, double Y, string text, and that'll be center aligned by default. I believe you can also change that, but and then you with by instead calling the text left and text right. But yeah, X and Y, as I assume you guessed, tells you the position of the text, and then string text tells you what you want to be put on the screen. And then change the text size or type. If you want a fun font, you have to add import java.awt.font. Like at the top of your very top of your file, above where it says class, you need to add that line just so your class basically just so your file slash class knows that, oh hey, I need to be able to access the font information. And so you can use standard draw.setFont, new font, um, and that like the first thing will be the name of the font, then will be the font style, which you can like look up what the font styles are, and then the last thing will be like the size of your font. And then you'd call the same standard draw.text function to draw hello world in Arial, very big font and bold. Um, and like I'd say changing the text size and type, it's never going to be required for this course. It's just if you want to. You should know how to draw text. That I'd say is required, but don't need to know how to change text size and type. That's just for if you're interested. And then to draw other shapes like polygons, lines, arcs, or do cool drawing stuff like changing the canvas size if you want to, adding a title. You can also add images, so those will be printed on the canvas. Just read the documentation. I'm sure you could look up an example as well, but documentation tells you generally how it works, and I'd say try it on your own just by looking at the documentation before like seeing an example. But if you aren't sure like what the a certain part of the documentation means, I'd say A, just try to get out on your own, or B, just ask a TA. They're happy to help and show you an example. Cool. And then a lot of the time, you'll want to have a fun little animation. Don't want just like a static drawing. So, generally in animation, you want to make multiple changes before showing them to the user. So like stop motion, say there's like a character moving, and I don't know, like a cloud or something moves. Like two things will move, like in between frames, in order for them to like move at once. So take your first picture, move two or more things, then take the next picture, and like repeat. But if you don't use like an animation style like this, standard draw will just display everything you draw immediately after the you add it to the canvas. So like say you're drawing a face, it'll be like first you see a circle, then you see like one dot appear for one eye, next eye, then the smiley face. And like if you add anything else to the canvas, you just see it being added one by one. And especially if you want anything to move, then you'd see like say you had your face moving, you'd see all the faces on top of each other. If you didn't like have that kind of stop motion animation style. Um, and so just basically what this all means is you're going to need to redraw everything on the canvas each frame because we want to be able to like clear the previous frame, then move on to our next frame. And like the next frame, maybe the size has changed slightly, or like the position has changed slightly, but you need to redraw everything on the canvas, and each subsequent frame will have like some small changes. I think this makes more sense with an example, which I'll show you momentarily. Um, and also, you must call standard draw dot enable double debuffering for this to work. That's what lets you like clear, like draw the whole image, like the whole scene or frame, and then like pause for a bit, let the user see it, and then clear that image, and like replace it with a brand like the next frame. So here are the steps, and it's usually within an infinite or very long loop. But first, you'd have standard draw clear, so that will remove everything that's currently on the canvas. And then you use standard draw to show more stuff and update any other like variables, like you say you're updating the position variable or something like that. Um, and then you'd call it a standard draw dot show, and that shows everything that's currently on the canvas in like the new frame. So, here's the quick demonstration. All right, so here I'm in just a quick example in VS Code. So you'll note I have enable double buffering on. I'll show you what it looks like without having enable double buffering on. And so yeah, first I just set some initial positions. Um, don't like worry too much about like remembering all these, but and then I also at the beginning I set the pen radius to like pretty wide. I want it to be visible. And then I'd say first, look at it without the for loop, see if you can understand like what it's doing if it wasn't in a for loop, and then think about how the for loop like changes the position each time. So just looking at it what's in the for loop, we clear the previous animation. We don't want to see like the previous animation um with like below the stuff we're drawing now. Then we draw the body. So I set the color that I want the body to be. And then I draw a filled circle using the X position. Don't worry about like the increase because that's part of the for loop. And then starting Y position and then the starting radius. Makes sense. Just like a filled circle at a certain position with a certain radius, which you can see up there. And then draw eyes. Eye white's pretty similar. You set the pen color to white, and then you draw a filled circle at the position you want. I just made like the eye distance depend on like where the eye started, depend on where the like position of the overall shape was. And then eye pupils, also very similar, just like using a slightly smaller radius and black for the pen color. And then smile. Setting the pen color to I believe that's green. Yeah, mostly green. And then you use the I use the standard draw.arc function. I'd say that's pretty good for making like a smiley face or something. Um, yeah, so it starts with the X position, then the Y position, then like the radius you want, and then the angles you want. So it gets a little confusing, but basically you're telling it, like an arc is just a part of a circle, right? So it's telling you what the so you tell it what the radius of the circle, you want to take an arc out of is, and then you show the angles that like your arch should start at, and your arc should go until. So hopefully it makes a little more sense when I like show you what the example printed looks like. So it always confuses me when I'm using it for the first time in a while. Um, and then yeah, you call standard draw.show, and that'll display like that frame of your animation. And then standard draw.pause, not required. I like it because it like pauses a little bit extra, so your animation will move a little slower. So let's see. Again, remember I have enabled the double buffering off, but let's see what the example actually looks like. All right, so yeah, very slowly, like a smiley face is moving across the screen, and you see all the like flashes. That's because enable double buffering is off. Because by default, buffering is disabled, and basically double buffering is like, so you have what's currently displayed on the screen, and then you have like a new screen that is created every time you hit clear. And like everything that you draw on there is put on like the new screen. Then when you hit show, it's like displayed on the like screen that you were just drawing on. It's displayed actually to the user. And then whenever you do clear, you can make a new screen. You draw everything, and then you replace that on the old screen. And so let me just show what it looks like when enabled double buffering is called. So yeah, as you can see, way smoother. Smiley face doesn't have like all those glitches you saw in the previous version. So yeah. And just like as I hope you can see, like the increase in the for loop just shows like how the X position should increase. So the bounce might be a little confusing, but it's basically I just made it so that it starts like with the face invisible, like not visible, and it ends once the face has gone past the screen, and it just like the X position just increases by a small amount each time. I could make that even small, like this increase even smaller if I wanted an even smoother animation. But yeah, I know this is can all be a little bit complicated, so like look over this code. I also put it in the like slides and the comments of this slide in the recitation slides. So if you still are confused, feel free to like copy and paste that code into your VS Code and like run it, see how it works. You can change things if you want as well. And like let us know if you have any comments, questions. You can always go to office hours like to help like work through standard draw stuff with a TA because this stuff can be complicated and like especially with the documentation. Probably could be written better for people just learning to how to use CS, but yeah. Hopefully demonstration helps like actually see how it all works. All right, cool. And then also in this module we have some generative AI notes just because like using generative AI is an option for assignment 4, which I think it's fun. It's cookie clicker. Um, But yeah, just some notes. Of course, you're never required to use AI for this course. Um, like we're never gonna make you use AI. We always recommend to have you try something yourself first. Because like do as much as you can on your own, and like really only use AI when you're stuck is like where it's most helpful. Additionally, TAs are a good resource to go to before trying AI. TAs have all done like everything in this course before, and so we know like all the potential solutions that you're trying to go through. Whereas the AI, it's kind of just guessing, especially in some places. So I always say go to TAs before you try AI. And especially if AI doesn't help, TAs have experience in code and like can know exactly where the AI is going wrong. Additionally, I'd say use AI when you get like completely stuck, like you don't know where to go from there, like you don't know maybe what like a formula that you need is asking for, or like you have no idea, let's say, um, like yeah, what the instructions like honestly if you have no don't know what the instructions are asking, I'd maybe talk to a TA first. But yeah, if you just get completely stuck and don't know how to do something, or if like you need an explanation on how some code works, AI can be helpful for that if like office hours aren't happening at the moment. Additionally, you want to keep prompts short, clear, and concise. Don't like copy like a problem directly into ChatGPT. Um, like keep the prompt as like short as possible and make sure it's clear so like you're directly telling the AI exactly what you want to do. We have some examples on the of this on the next slide. Also, just never copy and paste from AI to your like VS Code. Think through everything you write and like sure you can reference what the AI put out, but like think through everything you're writing as you're typing it, and make sure you understand exactly how it works. If you're having trouble understanding how it works, I recommend like tracing out like how each variable is changing and like exactly what your code is doing, exactly what it's outputting, um, like on a piece of paper or something, just so you can understand what each step does. And of course, debugger is a great tool for that as well. Yeah, but yeah, always ask AI to explain anything it writes. I mean, especially if doesn't make sense. But even if you do think you have the handle of it, just go ahead and ask AI to explain everything it writes so you can see like all of the potential like reasoning behind it. And yeah, I already said don't directly paste problems into ChatGPT. Like maybe I'd say probably ask for like an example of something similar. That's probably better. Or like if you need to ask directly about something you wrote, like help me debug this. Provide like as short of a code sample as you can. But here's some potential questions you could ask generative AI. So first, how could I use insert standard draw method here? Just have it explain the documentation for you. I say it's very helpful to use documentation on your own, especially since for this course and other courses, like on paper exams, you'll probably be given like examples of documentation and you need to know how to read that. It happens a lot in like CS courses, so just make sure you can read documentation on your own too. But like of course, seeing the AI's explanation can help you get to the point where you can read documentation on your own. Yeah, but explain what this documentation needs. Very good question. Or give me a high explanation of how to do insert task here, maybe like a broad task. Or just like how to iterate through arrays. I mean, I'd maybe check your notes for that one, but just high level explanation of like how to do a bigger task, or like maybe help me break down a task into smaller portions. TAs can also help with that as well, and like maybe a little more specific to this course. Additionally, why might I be getting this error message? I mean, you can also Google error messages, but like just see error messages the first time you see them can be hard to decipher. So asking for like an in-depth explanation of an error message is always helpful. Or like if you have incorrect output, you're tracing your code, you have no idea why that incorrect output is happening, debugger isn't helping, then I'd say go ahead and like maybe paste your output, see why like get that output, you might be getting that incorrect output. Additionally, like let's say there's like maybe like a standard draw method you're not sure on or like something. Just give me an example of whatever it is and explain how it works. Or like what's the syntax for blank? Again, I'd probably maybe check your notes first, but if like you're just like wanting a quick example of syntax, that's a good question. And then maybe write some code similar to a code example that does something else instead. So see how you can like modify some code, or like write an example of blank. If you want like an example of something similar to what you're working on, but not quite, so that like you can come up with the like whatever you're trying to accomplish on your own. And then, of course, there's other options, but that's for this slide. What's another way to do blank? If you think maybe there's a more efficient way, or just like another option. What's another way to do something? So, hopefully that helps give some like general guidelines on how to how we recommend using AI for this course, and how it'll probably be most helpful as a tool. Again, just like don't ask it to give you the answers for you. Like the point of CS is being able to think through all of these difficult problems. Um, and like come up with these solutions like yourself. Like generative AI should only be like a tool to help you come up with those solutions. Cool. And then upcoming for this week, pretty chill, just Studio 4 on Wednesday. Um, yeah, Studio 4 is a good one. Flag Studio, a lot of people's favorite. And then next week, fall break. Pretty cool. No lecture or quiz. For that, since like there's no class on Monday. And then recitation will just be about formatting code well. Since you have student studio peer review on Wednesday. So that's like also about like reviewing a peer's code and making sure it's formatted well. And then also, assignment 4 will be like expected to be completed on Wednesday. Um, so I'd say recommend at least like trying out assignment 4. Can be a bit tricky and like there's more opportunities for like using prompt engineering on that assignment. But Cookie Clicker, a lot of people are familiar about that with that game. It's fun. All right. Hopefully all that sounded good to you. Just let TA or someone know if you have any questions about output or input, and we'll see you in studio on Wednesday. Thank you.